Okay, Adam, did you want to make me the host in case you have to take off?
I'll do that in a few minutes.
Okay. All right. Erev Tov, everyone. Good evening. It's so nice to be back with you all. Adam, you can hear me okay? Transmission's good?
So far, so good.
Okay, great. Okay, as everybody knows by now, it is my minhag, it is my custom to open every opportunity to teach with a nigun, with this Hasidic practice that creates an intention, that creates kavanah. You know, research also tells us that when we sing, it actually changes our brain waves. It releases endorphins that generate pleasure, that generate positivity, that release oxytocin, alleviating stress, alleviating anxiety, and really supporting and nurturing us in the generating of trust and of bonding. So what could be better before launching into some study together than to sing a brief nigun? I'm going to sing a nigun melody. It is wordless. I invite you to join me if you like. And it is the melody to which the words Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha are traditionally sung. We should love your fellow human being like you love yourself. We'll come back to that a little bit later, and you'll understand why I chose that. Nai nai na na nai nai, ai nai 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 nai, ai nai 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 nai, ai na nai 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 na na nai nai, ai na na nai nai, ai nai 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 nai, ai nai na na nai nai, ai na na nai nai. I nai 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 nai. Welcome back, everyone, to the second session of this series of Everyday Ethics, where we're going to focus tonight on the question of shopping and consumerism and how we can bring a greater awareness of Jewish wisdom and Jewish ethical traditions into what has become, for many of us, a rather mindless practice. And yet, it is a practice that includes choices that actually have quite considerable implications for the relationships that we seek to have and for the world that we seek to live in, including the economic world, including the social world, and the spiritual world. I want to invite your attention. I hope that you all got the reminder email with the source sheet. If you didn't, then I don't know, Adam, are you able to drop the link to the source sheet?
Yeah, I can probably put that in.
That would be great. Thank you. And then whoever wants can open it up then. But I want to invite you first to look at the quote from Blue Greenberg, wife of Rabbi Yitzhak Greenberg, and a scholar and feminist and activist who has had a major impact on the Jewish world. She writes, "If we are truly alive, this worldly, interactive, and growing, then willy-nilly we are forced to make countless moral and ethical choices every single day of our lives. Those who do not wrestle daily with ethical dilemmas have either surrendered or lost free will, or, at the dark end of the spectrum, have tilted towards psychopathic behavior. One thing is certain, the individual cannot do it alone." It's a very powerful text from Blue Greenberg about how, as I shared in the opening session, how even the most mundane micro choices that we make in our day-to-day lives have massive impact on who it is that we wish to become, and as I said before, in the relationships that we have with the people with whom we share this world. And her point is, none of us can do this alone. Yes, those micro choices take place within the confines of our individual lives. Where am I buying my coffee? How am I paying my employee? However, to truly wrestle with the implications of those choices, the variations on those choices, we need each other. We need this opportunity, just like this one, to learn, to reflect, to study, and to dialogue. Rabbi Joseph Telushkin, I invite you to look at the second sort of centering text on your source sheets. Often the hardest thing in life is not doing the right thing, but knowing the right thing to do. Again, underscoring the importance of evenings like this to come together and to figure out together what the parameters are for the choices that we make. Again, this is not a session, this is not a series, and I'm certainly not a rabbi that believes there is one answer to every question. So this is not all about all of us arriving at a certain answer or resolution to the dilemma that we're going to be looking at tonight. But this is about creating chevra, it's about creating community, it's about knowing that we are not alone in wrestling with who am I called to be in this world and how can I best reflect that? When it comes to the importance of ethical considerations in the building of our human lives and notably in the building of our Jewish lives, our spiritual lives, there's a famous Hasidic line which says, if praying, if davening makes you deaf to the cries of a baby, then there's something wrong with your davening, right? It's a little Hasidic pithy teaching that sets up the fact that our religious life cannot live divorced from our sense of moral responsibility to people around us. That presumed hierarchy does not exist in our Jewish consciousness. That attending to the cries of a needy human being, that making the effort to relate to other human beings with as much dignity and integrity as we can muster is every bit as much, arguably more so, an act of religious devotion, an act of fundamental piety. Okay, let's get into our session tonight. If you see, the question that we will be wrestling with submitted to the ethicist went way back when Randy Cohen was editing the column in the New York Times. This question from Texas was submitted. I needed a video camera, so I went to a department store where the clerk educated me on the various models and let me try them out to see which I liked best. Then I went home and bought it for $100 less on the internet. I feel bad about it, but not $100 worth of bad. Is that terrible? Okay, this is the jumping off point for our discussion tonight. As always, I'm going to turn to you for some initial reflections. What's going on here? What are the issues? What are the conflicts? What's at stake? What are the values that are implicated by this question? Anybody want to take a shot at this? Don't be shy. I can't see you all, so just unmute yourself if you wish to speak, or you can raise your hand.
You led the clerk on.
Hi, Karen.
Hi, sorry I'm not on camera.
No worries. You led the clerk on. Tell me a bit more. What do you mean?
You led the shopkeeper to believe that they were going to make a sale, and you really didn't have any intention of buying.
Okay, so there's a certain amount of deception, would you say, going on here?
Yes, and you wasted their time because they could have been helping somebody to whom they could have sold something potentially.
Okay. Just curious, is there any kind of objective threshold to the point that you're making, Karen? Like, you know, it's $100 difference. Would it have been any different if he was looking at a $10 item or a $30 item? Just curious.
I've actually studied this text, so I feel pretty strongly about it that you're not supposed to do it under any circumstances. But people do it all the time and don't think twice about it. And it would seem that the value of your time is worth something, then the bigger the item, the more of an issue it should be. But
okay,
I think it's more the philosophical concept of it.
Okay. Karen, can I push you one more step? Just because you've opened up a really important piece to this here. Interestingly enough, and we'll talk about this in a couple of minutes, as clearly as the Jewish message is from our texts that exploiting somebody or deceiving somebody is way out of bounds, there actually are some objective thresholds that help guide us around when we've really crossed those boundaries and when we really haven't. So it's an interesting point. And the other thing that I wanted to push you on, if I may, I mean that with great respect, to invite some dialogue. You had said, I lost my train of thought. There was something that you had said that I wanted to extend, but it'll come back to me.
Well, I think I know where you were going, and I guess what I would say is that for me, what I only feel comfortable shopping if I know I'm not planning to buy. If I say to the person up front, I'm not shopping today, I'm just looking.
Okay.
And then if they're still willing to help me, then that's their choice, and I haven't misled them.
Okay, so great. You actually just reminded me of my question, and then I'm going to get to Gila and to Sydney. If in fact, you had said something to this effect, but if in fact, like, this is the way of the world. Oh, I think you said, but we all do it, right? Mm-hmm. So does the fact that we all do it lead us to make any reasonable assumptions that the clerk that we're engaging has got to expect that not everybody who engages them with questions about this product or that product is actually there to seriously buy? What role does kind of minhag hamakom, like it's the custom of the place, this is how people shop today? To what extent does the clerk bear any responsibility, just an open question, for assuming a certain amount of the indefiniteness of the interaction that we're talking about? I just want to put that question out there. I'm going to get to Gila and then Sydney. Gila, you can unmute. Yeah.
Actually, my husband is in a long line of retailers. He's a third generation of being a retailer. My son has a specialty store, and my son has just gone into it. And I think they go into it knowing, if you're a retailer and you think the person is going to possibly go online and buy it. So if you're fooled, like if you think that's like, I just think it's the way of the world right now. I mean, so if you need to just do something different, it's not just about price. He has a big and tall man store, and so it's a little bit trickier, but he's offering a huge service. So you need to be just doing something different in this world. So I don't know that it's that unethical, because I think every person who walks through the door, I am probably the only person in the world who's never ordered anything online. So like, I just don't.
Wow.
I just don't. I don't know. I don't have an Amazon account. I don't care. I don't, whatever. I don't like to shop on or offline. So, but I'm just saying everybody does it. So you just need to, as the person on the other side, I think you just have to realize that's what it is. And,
okay,
offer up something else. So I don't know that I don't think people are being unethical by going in there. I just think you need to be, I don't know. That's my opinion.
Okay. Thank you. Hi, Sydney. How are you?
Hey, you've got me now. Look, comparison shopping has been around for decades, whether it's by human beings going from store to store, or by getting on the phone and checking prices, or now using internet to do it. I don't know that it's an ethical question with regard to comparison shopping. But the second part that you raised with regard to the clerk, I think would be unethical on your part to mislead the clerk, using up the clerk's time in order to learn everything you need to know about the product, and then buying it, going home, and then returning it after you've bought it elsewhere. That's where the question of ethics will come into play. I don't think there's anything wrong with going to find out about the product, be it through internet, telephone, friend, or clerk. But whether you acquire the product and how you acquire it, that might raise the ethical considerations.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to push us forward a little bit now. And I know your name is not Lillian, Mr. Reinblatt. I can't remember your first name. Will you help me out? You're muted. Hi.
There we go. Okay, and it's Stanley. My name is Stanley.
Stanley, yes, Stanley. Hi, how are you? Stanley,
Hi.
can I ask you to just hold your thought for a couple of minutes till I get a little bit more underway, and then we'll come back?
Yeah, well, if the memory holds up, okay.
Okay. So a couple of words of background in terms of how Jewish values might relate to our discussion tonight. You know, we tend to think of business ethics mostly in the realm of the responsibility of the business. But tonight I want to remind us that as consumers, we also bear responsibility to consume ethically, as Sydney just reminded us as well. You know, the concept of caveat emptor, right? Like buyer beware, that is very much rejected by Jewish tradition because that kind of too easily lets the seller off the hook. But Jewish values also reject the universal assumption that the customer is always right, because at the other extreme, we know that customers can also be exploitative and can also be dishonest. So in Jewish law, you certainly can't overcharge for things, but you're also responsible not to underpay for things. The bottom line is, in whatever role someone plays in the transactional dynamic, you cannot exploit someone who's vulnerable, whether that's the buyer or the seller. Now let's look at some big Jewish ideas that may be implicated by the question at hand. And I suppose I should have said earlier, though it feels like it goes without saying, we are living in a world where shopping, especially because of the pandemic, has become a gargantuan feature of our lives, and the ease with which we shop online and simply click buy has actually diminished a lot of people's consciousness and conscientiousness around these matters. But we'll get to some of that. Okay, take a look at the big Jewish ideas with me. The first one is Marit Ha'ayin, or Marit Ayin, a concept that translates literally to the appearance to the eye, right? When you are behaving in a way that reasonably allows people around you to assume what it is that you're doing. This goes to Karen's point, where if you are browsing in a store and engaging a clerk in conversations around the merits or demerits of a certain product, the Marit Ayin concept here is that you're really giving off the impression to those who see you that you are interested in purchasing something. And if you are not, then you are somehow deceiving the people who are able to observe your behavior. Right? Marit Ayin is a very well developed concept in Jewish ethics, and gets invoked in lots of different settings, and here as well. Take a look at the value of genevat da'at. Genevat da'at literally means stealing someone's mind, stealing someone's knowledge. Again, to the point where if you are behaving in a way that you are interested in buying something, if you're suggesting through your words and your actions that you are interested in making a purchase, but you actually aren't, then you are stealing the mind of the person you're interacting with. You are stealing their knowledge. You are robbing them of the capacity to properly and responsibly evaluate the situation before them. And they will end up doing more for you than is justifiable given their time and given their interests. Genevat da'at. Lifnei iver lo titein michshol, before a blind person, do not put a stumbling block. And we're going to come back to this verse a little bit later. How is behaving in the way that our writer behaved putting a stumbling block before the blind? Again, another iteration of the concepts that we have been referring to. You are putting an obstacle before someone who cannot perceive that there is an obstacle because you are deceiving them, an obstacle to them actually getting any return for the time that they are investing in you. You are withholding the information that you're actually not serious about purchasing, and you are putting something in their way that will trip them up in doing their job in the way that they are invested in doing it. Are there any other Jewish values that you think belong on this list, the sort of big Jewish concepts that are at play here? Any others? Stanley, I don't know if your comment related to offering another Jewish value at play here?
No, it was dealing with the clerk. If you call up the clerk, well, how much do you sell this for? Thank you very much. That's one thing. But if you go in and deal with him, that's something else. But the other point that what about people who call 1, 2, or 3 restaurants, maybe I'll go, and don't have the decency to call to cancel, which the restaurant would be very happy if you cancel, fine, you come to, but this way you're killing them twice.
Yeah.
Number one, you're not, and they could have had somebody else sitting at the table.
Yeah.
Your other point, we're holding out, there's a concept in law called holding out doctrine. If you hold yourself out to be the owner of something and act in the owner and let somebody believe it, you can imply your own obligations. So that's been adopted. It's a Jewish principle that has been adopted in law.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other sort of big Jewish ideas or big Jewish values that you think belong in this part of our conversation about what's at stake here? I'm gonna put one on the table. And that goes back to the melody that I sung when we opened our session tonight. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, that you should love your fellow human being like you love yourself. I think it might belong here because it raises the question of our concern that we ought to have for the well-being of the clerk, for their ability to make a living, somebody who likely earns on commission. And what about our concern for local shop owners who struggle to survive competing against big box stores? And think of how many of our local small business owners have had to close their businesses during the years of the pandemic when nobody was able to frequent their stores, and we all turned to online shopping from very, very big purveyors. The pandemic has radically expanded online shopping, making it so easy for so many of us to just mindlessly go online and just click buy, never mind the ethical consideration about buying so much stuff that we actually don't need, which has a different ethical piece to it in terms of our world today. But there have been a number of articles published calling for greater consciousness and conscientiousness around online shopping for these very reasons, including one recently in the New York Times that asks us to remember that shopping, whether in person or online, is exactly what helps to keep the wealth in our society being distributed and redistributed, keeping the economy moving, which should be a moral priority for all of us, given its ability to shape the lives of so many, if not all, stakeholders in our shared society. We have to ask ourselves, particularly now in this moment in human history, which stores do we want to see survive this period of chaos? And if we want to see them survive, then we have a certain responsibility to consider when we make decisions around where am I going to buy X or Y. You know, when we order directly from stores or restaurants or designers rather than third parties, that allows those originators of that product to keep more money in their pockets and have a more robust and stable business. Not to mention that local stores, local business opportunities are often those that are the most fertile grounds for breeding new talent, for allowing young and emerging professionals to find their way. And let's not forget, as we've learned, particularly over the last 2 years, that in many situations, the workplace conditions of those working in big warehouses, packing order after order, has left a lot to be desired. Concerns about health safety at Amazon and other places has been in the news a lot. And I'll put one other thing out there in terms of ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, the environmental cost of ordering without thinking, however many times a week from a big online provider and buying things we don't need comes at a serious planetary cost, which oftentimes burdens vulnerable people in an unequal way than it does many others, including many of us. And so those are all pieces that I think are contained within the obligation ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha to think about the choices that we make when we shop, how we shop, when we shop, how often we shop, where we shop, upon the lives and the livelihoods of everybody else who is a part of the fulfillment of that order. Any thoughts or comments on these big Jewish values before we get into some of the weeds of Jewish texts that I think will expand our conversation even further? No? Okay. So let's dive in. Take a look at...
Jeannie?
Yes.
Hi, it's Rhoda. Jeannie, I always wonder how Jewish ethics would look at not so much how we buy, but what we buy. And if the how we buy has something to do with the what we buy. If somebody's starving and they manage to get the cheapest deal on some food, that's fine with me. But when it's, some plastic thing or a cashmere sweater or whatever that's going to land up in the Pacific Ocean, I wonder what the Babylonian rabbis would say about that. I wonder if you have any comments.
There are actually many texts which give voice to the concerns that you're raising, Rhoda, in terms of making sure that our economic and commercial lives are contributing to the society around us and are not detrimental to them. And I'm going to allude to some of them a little bit later. Part of it has to do with the question of to whom we feel accountable and how we express that accountability. Certainly, as society has unfolded and our awareness of the implications of our choices has become much more detailed, we understand with greater depth how my choice to order a t-shirt sitting here on the Upper West Side of New York City could impact a young child in the global South. We understand that now. And consequently, our sense of responsibility has developed at the same time. Is that the kind of example you would be thinking about, Rhoda?
Actually, what prompted something you said triggered in my head the secondhand smoke problem, where we talked about cigarettes, and the argument was, really, they just couldn't manage eradicating something so many people were addicted to. But the argument was there are so many jobs at stake. And I thought, their job is to kill me. They're getting paid. And then I realized there are so many other products that in one way or another are killing us and killing the planet.
So that veers into, in other words, your question is a very salient one. And from the perspective of Jewish sources, it gets developed in the respective fields in which it gets raised. Okay, so when it comes to the moral and halachic claims that the climate crisis makes upon us, there are specific directives about not just what we buy, but how we produce the products that we make available to others. Why is it that if I own a tannery, I'm not permitted to locate that tannery within a certain proximity to a city, right? Those are the kinds of examples that already back, 2,000 years ago, the rabbis are raising in terms of the implications of our financial interests on the people around us, on our consumer interests, on the people around us? So it's an excellent, excellent question, and we will touch on it a little bit more here tonight. And I'll be doing a series actually in April on exactly this question: the claims that the climate crisis makes upon us from a moral and halachic perspective. That's going to be actually sponsored by the JCC on the Upper West Side, and everybody is welcome. It's going to be available online as well. Thanks for giving me that little that little advertisement space. Okay, let's. Jordan, you wanted to say something.
Hi, great to see you again.
Hey, you too.
Yeah, so just as a casual observer, it seems there's a I can't help but notice a paradox. On one hand, as Jews, I think we benefit tremendously from market capitalism, not only as consumers, but as as anonymous producers in a market. You know, we can produce wheat or whatever, and you just have to sell the commodity at the lowest price to have to make a living. But on the other hand, I see consumer market capitalism completely at odds with whatever Jewish value you've mentioned this evening, and whatever else I can think of, from overconsumption to issues relating to labor and environmental impact. And I don't know how you rectify or I don't know how you. These are two opposing concepts, and I don't know how one. I don't know how it sits well. How you can.
So
yeah.
How you reconcile them?
Thank you. Word, not rectify. Yeah, thank you.
So it's a very important point, and you've given me an opportunity to say just briefly, because it could be an entire session all on its own. Judaism embraces very comfortably capitalism. Judaism embraces very comfortably the drive to be successful, the drive to make money, and does not see it as a paradox in any way, to at the same time guide us in how to do that ethically, without exploiting anybody, without taking advantage of anybody, and without neglecting our responsibilities to tzedakah. Tzedakah, remember, is a word at its root, which means justice. We don't give charity. Charity comes from the Latin root caritas, which means love, and it depends on our, philanthropy, our love for fellow human beings. We don't wait for somebody to love someone who's in need before saying that they need help and we need to offer it. But it's about a just distribution of wealth. It's not an imposed, predetermined calculus of who has to have how much and who's not allowed to have any more. Judaism is very comfortable with material success and does not see any contradiction between enjoying material success and being able to enjoy it ethically and responsibly. So, Jordan, I hope just even saying that puts you a little bit more at ease. And of course, there's much more to talk about in detail around that, but I wanted to at least thank you for allowing me to make that point. Linda, I know you have your hand up. Can I move forward into some Jewish sources? You have something quick to say?
No, I'll come back to it. Maybe you'll address it before I get there. So.
Thank you for your generosity there. Okay, Chevra, come with me to source number 1 from Vayikra, which is considered a foundational source in discussing these kinds of commercial ethics. V'chi timkeru memkar la'amitecha o kano miyad amitecha al tonu ish et achiv. When you sell property to your neighbor, or buy something, I'm going to translate it more literally, from the hand of your neighbor, miyad amitecha, you shall not wrong one another. Now herein lies the root of a halachic concept called ona'at mamon. Ona'at mamon, basically the financial exploitation or financial manipulation. This is from Parashat Bahar in Vayikra, where we find the foundation for fair business practices. Do not wrong, this pasuk is telling us, financially your fellow by overcharging or by underpaying, thereby committing financial fraud. I emphasized miyad amitecha, from the hand of your neighbor, and Chazal, the sages in the Talmud, using that phrase, define this as a transaction that involves a movable good, an actual product that is bought and sold and moved between owners. Now, the basic principles of ona'ah are as follows. If the amount that is overcharged or underpaid is less than 1/6 of the value of either the money exchanged or the good that is purchased, then the transaction is valid. Here I'm going back to my exchange with Karen over whether there is an objective threshold to work with in these conversations. If it's less than 1/6 of a difference, the transaction is valid. If it's exactly 1/6, the amount that is overcharged or underpaid has to be made whole and the transaction stands. If it is more than 1/6, then the money has to be returned and the defrauded party has the right to cancel the transaction. So interesting, there are these very concrete parameters in which this ethical value gets played out. Now remember, ona'ah is not defined as stealing or cheating, but the word is to oppress or to distress. The focus is on the human or emotional or psychological violation, not necessarily the monetary one. And that's the one that has to be redressed if possible. Now, another important insight that derives from the double referencing of amitecha in this verse unfolds when we look at Rashi's commentary. And I believe that's on your source sheet as well. Rashi comes in and says there is also a midrashic interpretation. If what I just shared with you was a very concrete technical interpretation, Rashi says there's also a homiletical piece going on here. Where can it be derived that if you sell something, you should sell it to your Israelite fellow? Scripture states, quoting our verse, Lamitecha, sell it to your fellow, to your neighbor, the one who you are associated with. And where can it be derived that if you intend to buy anything, you should buy it from your fellow Israelite? Again, quoting the second reference in our verse, miyad amitecha, at the one that is associated with you. In other words, providing a livelihood and support to your fellow community members is considered a Jewish priority. Many authorities say that even if it requires that you pay a little bit extra to do so, or maybe that you charge a little bit less to do so, that this reflects the Jewish value of aligning our economic lives with our social and communal lives. You know, who are you going to go to when you have a toothache? You go to the dentist that sits next to you in shul, right? You patronize the business of someone with whom you have some connection. Now, if that's how our ancient and medieval authorities read this text, we have to ask ourselves, but how do we define who our neighbor is today? Who the one with whom we are associated is today? You know, centuries ago, your neighbor, your local merchants were more naturally a part of your community, a part of your chevre. And there are those who say that in the world in which we live, in the era of globalization, every human being should be considered your fellow and be deserving of your ethical consideration. But we know realistically that if we say that I have the same responsibility, the same moral and ethical responsibility to every single human being on the planet, that can very much undermine the kind of local relationships that become key to building stable societies and stable cities and stable neighborhoods. Rabbi Asher Meir, whose name is synonymous with the exploration of Jewish ethics, particularly around business ethics, argues that what we need in our more global era are concentric circles of empathy. In other words, when it comes to a global issue that affects everybody, like the climate crisis, we should all feel a moral responsibility to it because we are all implicated by it, everybody we know and everybody around the world whom we couldn't possibly know. On the other hand, if you consider the role that a free loan society might take in the lives of human beings, it makes sense to focus on local need, because it can be much harder, if not impossible, to administer an initiative like that across a wider swath. And he goes on to suggest this. This is where I was getting to a little bit in response to Rhoda's question. If we feel a sense of human kinship with laborers who might be exploited, let's say, in the developing South, right, in third world countries, then we should do everything that we can to advocate for their working conditions and to consume in a way that promotes their well-being. If you feel a stronger connection to your national or citywide labor force, then you should give preference to local manufacturers, even if it costs you a few pennies more. Note here the role of human subjectivity in determining an ethical and halachic norm. With whom do you feel today to be in greatest solidarity? Who is your amitecha today? And again, this is not a zero-sum game, but we're talking about preferences which have real and significant economic impact. The bottom line being that our ethical lives should live harmoniously with our social lives and with our economic lives. Do not exploit people to whom we feel connected or people to whom we feel accountable. Have concern and show that concern for people who make or sell or buy our goods. Buy and sell from people to whom you can actually manifest that kind of concern. Asher Meir also points out that there's a role to play for us in modeling for others what it means to plant the seeds of a loving humanity by first loving our own, right? And this is how some people understand the formulation of Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Why didn't the mitzvah, which is the core mitzvah in the Torah, if you open the 5 books of the Torah and you open to the middle of the 5 books, you get to Sefer Vayikra. If you open Sefer Vayikra to the middle of Sefer Vayikra, you will find our verse exactly right there. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. It is literally and figuratively the essence of our Jewish tradition. But why didn't the mitzvah stop at ve'ahavta l'reacha, love your neighbor? Why did it add that last word, kamocha? We all know it's not trite to say that in order to love your fellow human being, you have to be able to love yourself. And that only by loving yourself are you then able to love anybody else. So, as I said before, if we proclaim love equally for every human being, it would probably be very difficult to love anybody effectively. The dilemma of how do I distribute my empathy and my support ethically when there's so much need in the world is one that can be met in part with the argument that universal love starts with particular love. And the Jewish community has, as we all know, been praised across time and across the world for our extensive levels of literacy, of education, and for tzedakah, both internally in our communities and throughout needy societies across the world. By modeling that, hopefully others might be able to follow and find resources within their own choices to contribute to the overall well-being that we wish for all of humanity. My question is now, if we have this verse, I love this. Look, we had one line in Vayikra 25:14, and look how much we unpacked from it. And this is just the excitement and the beauty of studying Torah. If we have this line teaching us all of this, why do I need the next source? Look at source number 2, just 3 psukim later to 25:17. V'lo tanu ish et amito, ve'areta melohecha ki ani Adonai Elohechem. Do not wrong one another, right? And again, that word amito, your neighbor, do not wrong, but fear your God, for I am Adonai, your God. Why do I need this verse? You just told me all that 3 verses earlier. And of course, we know the Torah never repeats itself. So some people say we have this verse 3 verses later as a show of emphasis. Why do we need this emphasis? Some commentators say, these are matters that are so hard to regulate. They're so hard to enforce. Do I know that you as a merchant are upcharging me? Do you know that this is really all the money I brought with me today and all I can afford to pay you? So difficult to regulate and to enforce that the repetition here, coupled with the reminder, V'yareita me'elohecha, you should feel awe before God, ki ani Adonai Elohechem, because I am the Lord your God. That is the classic way of saying, be careful with your choices. You answer not just to this human being in front of you, but to your God as well. Now, maybe the repetition is here to teach us something else. Maybe it's here to teach us that there is another form of ona'ah, another form of wrongdoing that comes into the world of our economic choices. And we see that in the next text. Take a look at the Mishnah, Bava Metzia, from chapter 4, Mishnah 10. And Chazal teach us straightforwardly, Kashem she'ona'ah b'mekach u'b'memkar, kach ona'ah b'dvarim. Just as there is fraud and wrongdoing and exploitation in the world of mekach and memkar, of taking and of buying and selling, so too there is fraud, there is exploitation in the world of words. Lo yomar lo, b'chama chayfet zeh. Don't say to somebody, how much is this? How much does this cost? V'hu eino rotzeh likach. If you do not actually want to buy it. And there you have it, explicit from the Mishnah. Look at the Rashi that comes and ends up commenting on this, but I'm pulling it from the verse, the second verse in Vayikra. Rashi says, here scripture warns against vexing or exploiting or hurting someone with words, that you shouldn't annoy your fellow human being. Don't give them advice that's not fitting. Don't say things that are misleading. The question that I have for you in this space is, what role does our intention play here? Like, did we intend from the outset to mislead the clerk? Do we know 100% before coming into the store and engaging them that we have absolutely no intention of buying? Did we perhaps discover something in our interaction with them that alerted us to the fact that, you know what, it might be better off for me to buy it online? Rashi continues, but lest you should say, who knows whether I had the intention to do them any harm? Therefore, the verse ends with V'yareita me'elohecha, right? Be in awe before God, right? That in all matters, where it's a matter of conscience, where nobody knows exactly what's in the heart of one player or another, the Torah reminds us, have a sense of awe, have a sense of humility, have a sense of awareness of the significance and seriousness of your choice. Again, it's hard to regulate, and therefore we have to self-regulate. And we could argue that actually ona'at devarim, to exploit someone with words, is even more serious than ona'at mamon, than exploiting somebody with money. Because with money, you can own up to it and make somebody whole. But with words, how can you actually do that? Can you redress misimpressions? Again, the importance of the warning, V'yareita me'elohecha, you should act out of fear. I wonder, by the way, before we move on, for those who might not be as theologically minded or moved by the concept, V'yareita me'elohecha, that you should always act in fear of God, what might that concept mean? How might we restate that notion, V'yareita me'elohecha, in a non-theological iteration? Any ideas? Linda.
Sorry about that. I don't know, would it relate in some way to having a conscience, being conscious, being aware? I mean, it's not unrelated to, I think, what I was going to raise before in some ways, and that is that, you know, while we have access today to this wide world of possibility for buying, we also have access to information about the kinds of exploitation that's going on in the world, right? I mean, recently there was an expose just on Canadian television about what happens with goods that we return to Amazon, which it seems many of them don't ever get returned to the original seller. They get dumped into
Yes, I saw that.
landfill. Now, I have to tell you, I'm not a big shopper online either, but I have at least one child who is. And the first thing I did was say, did you see that last night? Because I know that you frequently, and she will frequently send something back because it didn't fit well or it wasn't what she wanted. And so once we have the awareness, I wonder if that doesn't put an added obligation on us. It's one thing when you don't know, but when you do know that goods are being made by slave labor, for example, in parts of China or in many other places in the world, does that place a different kind of obligation on us?
Yep. I like that.
Ignorant. So
I like that concept of conscience. I think conscience is a very good word and could be useful for people who are not as theologically minded, as I said before. Your comment, Linda, reminds me of one of the most, one of the verses in our Tanakh that has had a lasting impact on me. It comes from the book of Kohelet, where Kohelet says, from the book of Ecclesiastes, where Kohelet says, Yosif da'at, Yosif machov, that the more knowledge we have, the more heartache we have. Heartache in the sense that it is difficult to live with knowledge because knowledge places upon us claims of moral responsibility. And it is cumbersome, burdensome, and often painful to make sure that the choices we make live in alliance with the knowledge that we bear. So thank you very much for your comment. I appreciate it very much. Chevra, come with me to the next source from the Babylonian Talmud, Masechet Chulin. We'll open up another dimension of this for us. Rabbi Meir used to say, Al yisarhev adam lechavero lis'od etzlo, v'yodea bo she'eino so'eh. This might be a familiar scenario to some of us. I'm sure we have all, I'm sure we can all recognize ourselves that, one should not invite or urge their friend to eat with them if they know they're not going to accept the invitation. And you see, I translated in brackets there, another way of reading it also. Don't invite somebody to eat with you, dafka, because you know they're not going to accept your invitation. Yeah, okay, guilty. Come on, if I can admit it, I'm sure there are many others who might be able to admit it, right? I'm making a party and I only have room for 50, and there's somebody else that I really should invite. I know they're not going to come. I'd rather not offend them by not inviting them, so I'm just going to send the invitation, but I know they're not going to accept. Rabbi Meir would have a big issue with me. And by the same token, he taught, don't send such a person many, many, many gifts if you know that they're not going to accept them. And again, there's the don't send them many gifts, Defka, because you know they're not going to accept them. Right? This is an expansion on the notion of gnevat da'at, of stealing somebody's knowledge, somebody's mind. Now, it is asur, it is prohibited by Jewish law to lie. And it is prohibited to lie in any transaction. By the way, another great everyday ethics class, which maybe we'll have the chance to schedule later in the spring, is on this very question of, is it ever permitted to lie? But for the purposes of our conversation, allow me to offer a broad generalization that we are not permitted to lie. And there may be some exceptions, but tune in another time. This prohibition against lying includes not just actively lying, but also passively lying by omitting truths which might help somebody make an informed decision, like a clerk. As Karen said right from the outset, the clerk who needs to make a decision, how much of my time am I going to give you? How much of my attention am I going to give you that is going to take away from the attention that I might be able to give another shopper just a few feet away? This is a text that reminds us that it is asur to exaggerate, to mislead a customer about the quality of an item that they're interested in purchasing, or to mislead them in thinking that they're getting a great deal with the price that you're offering them. The importance of being honest in every moment of the transaction. To illustrate the importance of this teaching, there is a story about Rabbi Safra from Masechet Makot, another tractate in the Talmud. Story about how he was in the middle of davening. He was a shop owner. He was in the middle of davening, and somebody entered his store and wanted to buy a certain item. So he looks at the ticket, he looks at the price tag, and he offers Rabbi Safra the amount of money that the ticket said he was charging. But Rabbi Safra was in the middle of davening, so he didn't answer. The customer thought he was being ignored because maybe the shop owner didn't like the price that he offered. So he offered a little bit more. But again, he got no answer because Rabbi Safra was in the middle of davening. And so he kept offering more and more and more. And he didn't get an answer until Rabbi Safra finished davening. And when he finished davening, he turned to the customer and he said, happy to sell you this item, but I'm going to sell it to you for the first price that you offered me. Because that's the price that I, in my mind, having set the price on the price tag that way, that's the price I was prepared to accept. And it would be fraudulent of me to accept more just because you thought I was waiting for a higher offer. Now, it can't be overstated how much honesty is considered to be one of the most important traits for a Jew to cultivate within themselves. Lying is considered to be such a violation that the Kadosh Baruch Hu is the one, that God self is the one who comes and punishes for the violation of lying. And the underbelly of that teaching is that even somebody who lacks any other merits, spiritually or religiously, if they are honest in all of their business dealings, they are assured of a place in the world to come. There's this very famous story, right? When you pass from this world and you appear before the tribunal in the world to come, the first question asked of you, we might think is, did you believe? Did you keep kosher? Did you daven 3 times a day? Did you give tzedakah? The first question asked is, were you honest in your business dealings? Were you honest in your transactions with other human beings? Were you transparent? Did you have integrity in the way you interacted with the world around you? Now, interestingly enough, the sages actually, as I said before in response to Jordan, have a healthy embrace of capitalism and consumerism, and actually did approve of competition and even of certain initiatives that you could take in order to create competition, but all in the service of fair dealing with consumer. Take a look at the next text, and then I'll pause for a breath to see if anybody has anything further that you want to ask or comment on. Take a look at these next texts, which come from the Mishnah and Bava Metzia, and then the Gemara's commentary on it. Rabbi Yehuda said, a storekeeper cannot hand out toasted grain and nuts to children who patronize their store, due to the fact that they thereby accustom them, in other words, they accustom the children and their parents to come to their store at the expense of the competing storekeepers. The Chachamim matirin, but the rabbis permit doing so. Okay, let's pause for a second. You may no longer think that handing out grains and nuts would be the most compelling way to attract customers to your store. You can probably write that Mishnah today and put in, a free glass of champagne if you're a bridal studio, or perhaps, a free cappuccino, or God knows what. It may not surprise you to know that I actually come from a very long line of strong and industrious and entrepreneurial women. I take that with great zechut of both my great grandmothers in Montreal were business owners. My great grandma Annie had a dry goods store on Esplanade. And there was another dry goods store right next to her. And my great grandma Annie actually had a sign made that said, "Enter here." And everybody who was looking to go into a dry goods store on that street thought that you just enter in my grandmother's store and you could get to the store next door. No such luck. I didn't say I come from the most, pious. Anyway, so it might not be grains and nuts right now. She was actually a very ethical, very, very beautiful soul. But here Rabbi Yehuda says you can't unfairly entice people to come to your store. Chachamim, the sages, said, oh, yes, you can. Let's look at the Gemara's commentary. What is the reason for the opinion of the rabbis who permit the free distribution of grains and nuts or champagne and cappuccinos? To Amar Le, because the storekeeper can say to their competitors, Anama fligna amgoze, va'at plig shiski. I'm handing out nuts. Gegas and hand out plums. Again, I wouldn't advise plums today, but the point is, any of us can do whatever it is that we wish to generate some healthy competition and some added attention to our stores. So how might this really interesting text relate to our situation at hand, buying a video camera in this store? Can you offer any analogies? What if the owner of this store, and by extension the clerks, somehow, either make it known or establish the habits that they're happy to offer free, unlimited consultation to whoever walks in their store with the understanding that no one is necessarily there committed to buying? If there's an understanding culturally that that's how businesses work, that's how they compete. I went into a store yesterday, a couple of blocks away from me. I needed printer ink. A clerk immediately said, how can I help you? I said, I need this kind of printer ink. He walks me over to the display and he doesn't have the printer ink that I need. He didn't say, hold on a second, let me call another store and I'll get it delivered to my store and I'll have it for you later today or tomorrow. He was perfectly happy to say to me, you know what, I can't satisfy your order, but I bet that Staples a few blocks down may have what you're looking for. Completely unperturbed by the fact that I took a few minutes of his time and that he didn't convert it into a sale and didn't even try to. As if there's this assumption that part of the give and take that's going on is the way we do business. He didn't offer me a plum or any nuts and grains, but I wonder how making clerks and owners making themselves available to provide as much information as possible. Thanks for coming. Come back again sometime. How much of that is the real part of the way we consume today? Take a look at the next part of this Talmudic selection. You also may not reduce the price of a sale item below the market rate. And the rabbis say if one wishes to do so, they should be remembered positively. Zachor latov. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that the rabbis permit the shopkeeper to sell below market price? That should say market price. And even praise one who does so. Why? Mishum deka mervach latra. Because that helps to bring prices down, right? Choosing to buy your item for less money online might not necessarily be an unethical move, not by you and not by the seller of that lower priced item, because maybe that's part of the dynamic that keeps things affordable for people. And that was something the rabbis really cared about. Things need to be affordable. Let's keep the market competitive, but let's also keep it reasonable. So how would this text offer anything to say to our situation at hand? Okay, either you're all frozen or I've stumped you. Okay, I see Linda moving, so you're not all frozen.
I'm not sure how it ties in, but if the customer comes in and is honest, and then the retailer can just match the lowest price. Like, I don't know where that all fits into that, but like, if you just come in and say, and it's in big, like Best Buy, all these big stores do it. You can buy a dishwasher or washing machine, they'll match the lowest price. I mean, that's been going on from the beginning of time.
Yep.
But you can do it in whatever, I'm coming in or for whatever. If I find it for $20 cheaper online, will you match the price? I mean, you got to go
Right.
back. I mean, that's maybe the inconvenience, or I know, or whatever, but I'm not sure how that, but I feel like there's something just being honest, and the value of being honest and just doing it that way. And the retailer can probably do that.
Great. Thank you, Gila. I think that's a really helpful comment. And as we now make our way towards trying to
It's what my husband, the retailer, texted me. I asked him what he thought about all this, and that's what he says. Just be honest. He wants the customer to come in, be honest, and he just matches the price. I mean, he has the affordability to do that. That's his take on the whole situation.
you called a friend. Good for you.
Sorry,
I texted a friend.
Yeah, I actually think it harks back to the intentionality that you started to talk about earlier. I think it was Karen who said something at the beginning about, if you go in, I mean, I often go in and I do comparative shop, and I will say, I am looking at this kind of a product right now, and I'm checking different stores, and I'm wondering if you could help me. And I generally find that people are very helpful, and I'm being honest with them. And to be very honest with you, when I make my decision, I go back to the place where they were either most responsive. Sometimes it's not always the best price. Sometimes the way they interacted with me or the way they responded to me. So there may be more than maybe more than just a price factor involved.
Good. Thank you. Great. Anybody else want to offer a comment or a thought?
Yes. Hi, Dini, Marcy.
Hi, Mar-
I wanted to say that there's another portion to this I think of, because I work in a commission business. But when you go into a store, whether it's a shoe store or, where somebody's getting paid a commission, or Bloomingdale's or whatever, if you're dealing with one clerk and walk away for a while, I ask for the same clerk, because I felt the first person spent a lot of time with me and was helpful. So I don't want to just leave them and go to the next one who's standing right next to me. So,
Right. That's a really helpful piece of advice. We're already, I can see, jumping to the how can we resolve this situation ethically, given the insights from these texts. That's really helpful. Thanks, Marcy. Howard, hi.
Hi. First of all, thanks. I love the way you make me think. It's good. It's good to do it. I'm having a chicken and egg argument with myself. What really is the prime directive? Do I, as they say in Eshet Chayil, do I look well to the ways of my household and try to get the best price? Do I buy it at a higher price because there's a Jewish fellow who owns a store? Do I buy only local and well-sourced stuff, even if it means that 5 employees at Walmart are going to get laid off if everybody does the same thing? I'm having a tough time figuring out what the basic prime ethical directive is here, and I haven't really come to a conclusion. Can you help?
What I can say is welcome home. Welcome to the heart and soul of what it means to engage Jewishly with very difficult, complicated questions, made more so by a world that is getting ever more complex, filled with what seems like infinite possibilities around so many of the choices that we make. Howard, what I would say as a sort of expression of solidarity with the angst that you feel around how do I make the best decision, is that there's something really comforting about the fact that Jewish law is casuistic. The Jewish system, the halachic system, does not offer us broad directives. There is no such thing as this is what you need to do in every single scenario. Our tradition is multivalenced, and it's multivocal, and it's multidimensional. So that as we're doing here tonight, we're surfacing so many different values, considerations, insights, interpretations, all of which can help us look at a particular situation and try. That's all we're asked to do, is try to make the most thoughtful and respectful choice that we can make. And the tradition understands that what is in our minds and hearts the most thoughtful and responsible decision to make on this day at this time in relation to those people and this item might not be the exact same decision that we make tomorrow or the next week, or when I'm looking for something in another country and I have to make a different set of choices. So on the one hand, I want to say to you, I affirm your angst, and it's a sacred angst, and you're not alone in that angst. And I also want to say to you that you're under no obligation to be perfect. You're under no obligation to find the truth, because there isn't such a thing. But you are under the obligation, Jewishly, to give consideration to these things, to be mindful of the implication of our choices. And in the calculation, an absolutely valid variable is the well-being of your family, is the resources that you'll need to be able to make other purchases in consideration for those concentric circles of responsibility and accountability that you have to your nearest and dearest, in addition to those who are in wider circles. All of those are fair and valid variables. So I appreciate what you said. I want you to know you're not alone, and I feel comforted that I'm not alone.
Thank you.
Sydney.
Up here, okay. I think one of the things that has been set aside for the moment is there are more variables in a purchase than a question of price. And setting aside ethical considerations, service is one of the things that many people disregard, but is an important component if you're talking about purchasing a product, be it a pair of shoes to see how well the clerk fits you, or in the case of the recorder, whether there is after-sales service in the sense if you have a problem with the product. So sometimes you pay a little more because you know you're going to get service. I remember many years ago, my father used to trade in his car almost annually because he used it for work. But one of his criteria was getting the service from the dealer. So he was prepared to pay a little more to a particular dealer if he knew he could get the service on the car whenever required.
Yeah.
And maybe that's an ethical consideration to say, yes, you pay for the total package, not just on the question of price alone.
Yep. That's a really important comment, Sydney. And you remind us that, you know, with the ubiquitous presence of the potential to buy, right? The ubiquitous marketplace that defines our lives, we've all become conditioned to try to get the best price, to pay the least amount of money, to secure the best deal. But when we do that, we not only undermine our own interests, as you just described, like with your dad, you know, wanting to make sure that you have the best long-term relationship with this product. But when we're only focused on the bottom line is exactly when we also lose our focus on the larger ethical considerations that play into who we wish to be as human beings and the relationships that we are responsible for building and honoring with everybody else who plays a role in these transactions in our lives. Now, sometimes paying the least amount of money comes at the highest ethical cost. Now, last source number 6 from Vayikra, chapter 19, again, verse 13, 14. You shall not defraud your fellow Re'echa. You shall not commit robbery. The wages of a laborer shall not remain with you until morning. You shall not insult the deaf or place a stumbling block before the blind. Remember, I told you at the beginning, we'd come back to this. Lifnei iver lo titein michshol. And again, this verse ends with, V'yareta me'elohecha ani Adonai. You shall fear or have awe before God. I am Adonai. Rashi's commentary on this pasuk, on this verse, as you can read with me, this implies, give not a person who is blind in a matter of advice, which, this is not great English. Basically, don't give somebody advice that blinds them to the best choice that they can make. Don't say to them, sell your field, and with the proceeds from the sale, buy a donkey, when the fact is that you're trying to buy their field from them, right? If you have a vested interest in their making a certain transaction, don't be guiding them to do that if it's really not in their best interest. I was thinking about the analogy of this verse to our case. You know, the possibility of a clerk advising us to buy something or a model of something that we don't actually need because it has all these bells and whistles that we actually have no use for, right? But it would cost more money and they would make a higher commission. Or perhaps on the other side of the transaction, asking a clerk maybe to hold this item for you while you go and buy it online, just in case it's not available online, or to order this pair of shoes in your size, just in case you can't find them in your size for a cheaper price somewhere else. In other words, if you really have a vested interest that could come at the, at the price of someone else's vested interest, again, that's putting a stumbling block before the blind. So let's try to wrap up a little bit here, and then I'll pause again for some questions before my final step. And ask ourselves again, how do these sources that we've gone through and really unpacked help us resolve this question that was put to the ethicist? Knowing how our tradition guides us in these matters, can we see the case differently? Can we find, well, let's put it this way. Did what our reader participate in, like, was it really a terrible ethical move on their part? Did their intention matter? Do we even know what their intention was? Is there a way to justify the behavior of this reader, to have taken the time to look at this video camera and then and use the clerk's time and then go back and buy it somewhere else? What was wrong with their action? What might not have been wrong? And how could we re-envision the scenario or see ourselves in a similar setting and avoid the halachic pitfalls of genevat da'at, of stealing someone's knowledge, of marit ayin, of giving off a wrong appearance, or even of putting a stumbling block before the blind? Some of you have already offered some of those resolutions, and I'll summarize them, but does anybody have anything else with the insights that we now have that you can share about how to resolve or relate to this scenario? Okay. Well, let's summarize. Oh, Edna. Edna, did you want to say something?
Okay, I don't want to open a Pandora box, but I think that most of us will tend to go to a place where the price is better, especially these days. Starting with WhatsApp. We can call our friends in Israel, in South Africa, in New Zealand, and we're using WhatsApp. We are not using the bell. And are we going to skip on buying mundane things at the dollar store? If we can go to whichever store it is. No, we are going to go to, and we know that it comes from China, and we know the stories behind it. We are really trying to, to analyze it and to decide, is it fair, is it not fair? But no, because this is what we tend to do. Any of us will really skip dollar store and go to, I don't even know stores anymore, right? But just wonder. Ethically or not.
Yeah. Edna, you make an important point about human nature. And I think, as I said before, right, we have become conditioned by the marketplace, which has exploded even just in our own lifetimes in terms of how available things are. We've become conditioned to look for the best price, to spend the least amount of money, to get the best deal, to find that bargain. And, as I said before, sometimes that comes at the highest moral price. But we have to balance that against preserving our resources for all kinds of other priorities that we have. I hear your call as both an acknowledgement of our human limitations, but at the same time as an appeal for mindfulness around where and when it might be appropriate to look for the most economical way to buy something. Maybe bigger ticket items are items in which we could wrestle less with wanting to make sure we are finding the best price. Maybe for smaller everyday items, we have, particularly at this moment in human history, a bigger responsibility to try to patronize local stores that have become so vulnerable in the wake of a life-changing pandemic. Your point is well taken, and I think it only serves to reinforce the tradition's invitation to us to try to hold these things together. Sometimes they contradict each other. But remember, in our tradition, as I said last week on Ground Waves, that shalom, the concept of peace, even if it's an inner peace, a sense of inner integrity, is not a peace that is without conflict or contradiction, but it comes from the word shalem, wholeness, as a way of guiding us to be able to hold and manage sometimes contradictory impulses in the most mindful and thoughtful and considerate way possible. Linda.
So I just want to pick up a little bit on what Edna put out, because I think it's an important issue. I mean, I think that most of us, if not all of us in this session tonight, are quite privileged. And we have the option of making these choices. And there are an awful lot of people around, and particularly right now in the aftermath of the pandemic and in the face of the inflationary trends, that actually don't have those choices. I mean, there are people, you see them every day being interviewed, who can barely get food onto their table. And I think we need to take that into account too. Some people have more latitude in making some of these choices and grappling with some of the issues. And I think some people probably don't. So, I don't want to be so cavalier as to say, well, when you can, you try to, but I do think that there are many people who don't have that much choice to, and must choose what's the lowest price possible, because if the survival of their families depend on it. So, I don't want to forget that piece.
I appreciate you reinforcing it. It's part of what I was trying to communicate earlier to Howard, that there are many variables that are valid variables, including the wherewithal that anybody has to be as discerning as somebody else might be. And these are all legitimate considerations. And again, our halachic tradition, our ethical tradition, is not one that supposes universal ideals that everybody has to adhere to, but it is one that takes into account the very unique circumstances that we each find ourselves in, and the unique hand of life that we have been dealt, that we have to be able to play with, and to play well, and to play responsibly. Let me conclude what has been, I hope you'll agree, a really rich and engaging conversation about these issues tonight. And I hope they give you lots to think about in the decisions that you make, as we try to remember that everybody whom we interact with in our consumer life is as much created, B'Tselem Elohim, is as much an image of the divine as we ourselves are, and we have the responsibility, to the best of our ability, to conduct ourselves in such a way that brings out that dignity and that integrity between us and whether it's a store clerk or a shop owner, as best we can, being responsible to ourselves and to others. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Here is how Randy Cohen answered this submission. He said as follows. He said, it depends on your motives. If you were determined to buy your camera online, it would have been exploitive to enter the store intending to use it only as a source of information. But if you entered the store with an open mind, then you're in the clear. Many shoppers would be happy to buy their video camera at a bricks and mortar operation, what we used to call a store, if the price is right. In fact, many would pay more to buy it at the store, but not infinitely more. And no one is obligated to buy it at the store if it costs, say, $1 million more. Entering the store does not obligate you to buy the camera there at any price. Just as you can shop around checking prices at other stores, you're free to shop around online. One thing you might have tried is haggling. If you'd returned to the store and said the same camera was $100 cheaper elsewhere, they might have been willing to lower the price. It's exactly what some of you suggested too. However, your non-terrible behavior can lead to terrible results. If everyone does what you did, the store will go under and you'll have nowhere to try out new cameras. You must make a rational calculation of what is in your best interest, short-term savings or long-term shopping opportunities. Ultimately, this problem may be resolved by changes not in the buyer, but in the seller. To survive, stores must provide incentives for people to shop there. Helpful staff, quick repairs, great service, free pony rides for the kids, or nuts and grains, you might say. Otherwise, they can't vie with online outlets that have advantages of their own. Low overhead, no sales tax, huge inventory. So he concludes with many of the same insights and suggestions that you have all shared as well. And there are, in fact, as he says, ways that we can do this better. Be honest, be transparent, be communicative about what you're in the store doing, whether you're just looking or you're comparison shopping. Try to give that person a fair shot at their ability to earn from your purchase, whether you bring in a lower price and ask them to meet it, or as Marcy suggested, if you go back there, find the person who spent that time with you and give them their due. So I hope that this has been a helpful and interesting romp through the way we can become more ethical and mindful shoppers, and in so doing, not just fill our coffers, but enlarge our Jewish hearts and souls and bring more dignity and love and chesed to the world around us. It's great to be with you. We're going to conclude with Kaddish D'Rabbanan for having studied some text together. If it's your custom to, please rise. You can unmute and say Amen. I look forward to seeing you at upcoming ethics classes that we have. Ground Waves next again on March 15th. And I look forward to being in Montreal for Shabbat on the weekend of March 11th and 12th. Thank you all so much for being here. Stay safe and well. We'll conclude Kaddish D'Rabbanan. Yitgadal v'yitgadal shemei Rabbah. Ve'ad yivrach yirtzeh v'yamlich malchuteh v'chayechonu v'yamlichonu v'chay d'chol Beit Yisrael b'agalav v'zman kariv v'imru amen. Yehi shemei Rabbah v'varach le'elam le'el maya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitba'ar v'yishramam v'yitnaseh v'yithatar v'yitaleh v'yitalel shmei dekudashah b'richu. Le'ila min kol berchata v'shirata tishbechata v'nechmata damiran be'olma v'imru amen. Al Yisrael va'al Rabbanan va'al Tamideon va'al kol Tamidei Tamideon va'al kol mendo askin be'oraita divatra hadim v'di b'chol atar v'atar yehi lechon lechon shlama rabba china v'chista v'rachamei v'chayei v'richei v'muzanei v'vichei v'forkanami kadam v'honde b'shmai v'imru amen. Yehi shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Aseh shalom b'imromav v'yaseh b'rachamav shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'al kol yoshvei tevel v'imru amen. Laila Tov, everyone.
Yashikoah.
Thank you. Good night.
Good to you. Good night. Laila Tov.